It was April 8, 1943. 27,000 feet above the French countryside, the sky was crystal clear, the air thin and biting cold. Inside the canopy of his Focke-Wulf 190, Oberleutnant Ralph Hermican felt the stiffness of oxygen against his mask, the heavy beat of his own heart. He smirked, just barely, as his sharp eyes caught the ungainly silhouettes crawling toward his formation. There they were, the so-called new American escorts. Wide-bodied. Thick-winged. They didn't cut the sky like arrows, didn't glide like predators. They looked clumsy. Too heavy, too slow. He almost laughed. These were the machines America expected to challenge the Luftwaffe. Hermican rolled his shoulders, feeling the smooth tension of his fighter. The FW-190 was Germany's pride, sleek and lethal. This would be easy. His men thought so too. They were already keying up their radios, their voices sharp with confidence. "The milk bottles are here," one joked. Easy prey. But what happened in the next few minutes would shake Hermican's certainty, and leave him haunted. The Americans closed in, and for the first time the German ace noticed something strange. The stubby planes weren't falling back as expected. They were climbing, pushing hard into air the 190s usually ruled. The formations didn't scatter. They didn't waver. And then, the sky erupted. 8.50 caliber Browning machine guns opened from each American fighter. Not 2. Not 4. 8. 65 rounds a second tore through the heavens, stitching black lines of death across the blue. The sound was not sharp like the bark of German cannons, but a rolling roar, like a thunderstorm breaking apart the sky itself. Hermican blinked, stunned, as one of his wingmen vanished in a flash of flame. Another tried to roll away, but the clumsy American kept up, guns chewing his fighter apart piece by piece until it broke into shards that spun downward like falling leaves. Impossible. This wasn't supposed to happen. Hermican pulled hard, diving to escape the storm. He glanced over his shoulder and saw them, those fat, ugly planes, diving after him like iron beasts. Their wings didn't bend. Their fuselages didn't shatter. They just came, relentless, dragging walls of fire behind them. That was his first encounter with the Republic P-47 Thunderbolt. The Jug. And it would not be his last. Because what the Luftwaffe had mocked as a flying milk bottle was about to become one of the most feared, most unkillable machines in the history of war. The Republic P-47 was never supposed to be a legend. In fact, when the design first rolled out, even American pilots laughed at it. Compared to the nimble Spitfire, compared to the sleek Mustang, the Jug was monstrous. It weighed nearly 8 tons, as much as a loaded German bomber. It was huge, hulking, with wings so thick you could walk across them like a floor. But hidden inside that bulk was power. Raw, unapologetic power. The P-47's heart was the Pratt & Whitney R2800 Double Wasp, an engine so massive it took up most of the nose. 2,000 horses of roaring firepower. Coupled with a turbo supercharger, it allowed the Jug to claw its way up to 30,000 feet and still fight like a beast. It wasn't graceful. But it was unstoppable. Pilots said flying the Jug felt like strapping yourself to a sledgehammer with wings. It didn't turn like a Spitfire, it didn't dance like a Zero, but if you pointed it down and opened the throttle, nothing on earth could stop it. And when it came to firepower, nothing compared. 8.50 caliber Browning machine guns. 4 in each wing. Each one spewing 13 rounds a second. Together, more than 7,600 rounds a minute. Enough to shred tanks, trains, columns of trucks, entire squadrons if they were unlucky enough to be in the Jug's sights. The first time German infantry experienced a Jug strafing run, they thought it was artillery. Trees exploded. Trucks disintegrated. The ground itself seemed to rip open. Survivors later said they feared the Thunderbolt more than artillery, more than bombs, more than anything. Because you didn't hear it until it was already tearing you apart. And yet, the Jug's deadliest gift was not its firepower. It was its ability to survive. Pilots who flew it said the P-47 could take punishment no other plane could dream of. Entire cylinders blown off the engine. Holes in the wings big enough to crawl through. Half the tail gone, control cables shredded, cockpit glass shattered, and still, somehow, the Jug would drag itself home. One pilot returned with half his wing missing, skin peeled back like paper, fuel pouring into the slipstream, and landed. Another came back with no rudder at all. He said it flew like a wounded bull, but it flew. The Germans began calling it the Bulldog. Because you could shoot it, beat it, set it on fire, and it just kept coming. For the Americans, it became a lifeline. Missions deep into occupied Europe were possible because the Jug could escort bombers far beyond what the Spitfire could manage. It could dive through flak storms, duel with Messerschmitts, then loiter for hours strafing anything that moved below. In time, the Luftwaffe learned a bitter truth: if you saw a Jug in your sights, you weren't hunting. You were being hunted. That truth was carved into history by men like Robert S. Johnson. Johnson's story became legend. He was a farm boy from Arkansas who had learned to fly with clumsy hands but iron nerves. By 1943, he was flying the Jug over Europe. On one mission, his formation was ambushed by German fighters. Johnson's plane was torn apart. Cannon shells ripped through his fuselage. His cockpit filled with smoke. His canopy jammed. Blood poured down his face. Most men would have bailed out. But Johnson couldn't. His canopy was stuck fast. So he fought the controls, barely able to see, as German 190s circled like vultures. One ace dove in and began hammering him. Dozens, then hundreds of rounds tore into the Jug. Holes opened everywhere. His radio exploded in sparks. The armor behind his seat glowed red-hot. But still, the Jug flew. The German pulled alongside, close enough for Johnson to see his face. The enemy pilot shook his head, wagged his wings, and broke off. He had emptied his guns into the American and the Jug refused to die. Robert Johnson limped back to England in what should have been a coffin with wings. His P-47 had 21 cannon hits, hundreds of bullet holes, controls barely attached by shredded cables. When the mechanics saw it, they were stunned into silence. Johnson climbed out, pale and trembling, and said only, "She brought me home." From that day forward, the Jug had a reputation, indestructible. Robert Johnson's survival was not an isolated miracle. Time and again, the Jug proved it was not an airplane in the traditional sense, it was a flying fortress disguised as a fighter. Pilots swapped stories in smoky mess halls and airfield tents. Each tale seemed more impossible than the last, but each was true. One recalled returning with his tail almost completely gone, the horizontal stabilizer shredded into dangling wires. Another told of a Jug that came back on fire, flames licking the cockpit, paint peeling like paper, and yet the pilot made it back to base. Mechanics sprayed foam, pulled the man out alive, and stared at a machine that looked more like a burned-out husk than a warplane. There were stories of Jugs taking direct cannon hits to the engine and still clawing their way home, engines coughing like dying beasts but never stopping. One Thunderbolt even returned with over 600 bullet holes. Another limped across the channel with an entire cylinder blown clean off the radial engine, a chunk of the heart itself missing, and yet, like some wounded animal, it refused to stop running. The Jug didn't just save pilots. It saved hope. For the men in the bombers, the lumbering B-17s and B-24s, the appearance of P-47 escorts meant life itself. Before the Jug, American bomber crews had been shredded by Luftwaffe fighters. Messerschmitts and Focke-Wulfs dove into their formations like wolves into sheep, and every mission meant staggering losses. But then came the Thunderbolt. At first, the bombers weren't sure. They looked at those fat-bodied escorts and wondered if they would really make a difference. But soon, they saw it with their own eyes. Jugs diving like thunderbolts, hurling themselves at the enemy, filling the sky with walls of tracers. They didn't fight with finesse. They fought with fury. And suddenly, bomber crews started coming home. Losses shrank. Morale soared. Men who had once prayed only to survive a single mission began daring to believe they might live to see the end of the war. One gunner later said, "The moment I saw those big jugs above us, I knew we weren't alone. They looked ugly, but God, they were beautiful to us." But if the jug was a savior in the skies, it was a nightmare on the ground. The P-47 wasn't just a fighter, it was a tank buster, a train killer, a road clearer. With its 8 Brownings and its ability to carry bombs and rockets, it became the scourge of German supply lines. Trains were a favorite target. Pilots loved the sight of a long column of cars snaking across the countryside. They would dive low, lining up with the tracks, guns hammering. Locomotives exploded in clouds of steam and fire. Boxcars blew apart, sending wood and steel scattering like children's toys. Entire supply convoys meant to feed the German war machine were erased in seconds. One Luftwaffe officer bitterly remarked that the P-47 wasn't a fighter at all, it was a flying artillery piece. And it wasn't just the machines who felt it. German soldiers, marching along roads, learned to dread the whistle of the jug's dive. It came fast, sudden, with no warning until the earth erupted around them. Survivors described the terror, the sensation that the sky itself had turned into a predator. A German infantryman once wrote in his diary, "We fear the Jabos more than anything. At least with artillery, you have warning. With the Thunderbolt, death falls from the clear blue sky." And still, the jug's story grew darker, stranger, more legendary. Because not even the new wonder weapons of the Reich could stop it. The Germans rolled out the Me-262 jet, faster than anything in the air. They unleashed the FW-190 Dora, sleek and deadly. Yet even against these, the jug endured. It couldn't always outclimb them, couldn't always outrun them. But it didn't need to. It could dive. And in a dive, the jug was unmatched. With all that weight, when a P-47 pointed its nose down, gravity itself became its weapon. Other fighters shook apart under such stress. The jug just screamed down faster, 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 500, 600 miles per hour, a falling thunderbolt. Pilots said the controls went stiff, the wings groaned, the whole plane shuddered like it might rip itself apart. But it held. Always, it held. Many a German pilot, trying to follow, watched his own aircraft tear itself to pieces while the jug simply plunged away, invincible. The Thunderbolt didn't just fight battles. It fought wars inside men's minds. German pilots began to dread it. They whispered about its invincibility, its inhuman toughness. They spoke of watching jugs stagger back to base with damage that would have killed any other plane. Some even swore the Americans had built them with black magic. For the Americans, the jug gave courage. They joked that you could fly through a flat cloud, lose half your plane, and still make it home for dinner. That kind of confidence was priceless. And confidence, multiplied across thousands of men, can win wars. But the jug's legend was not only in what it destroyed. It was in what it endured, what it gave back. Think of Francis "Gabi" Gabreski, the Polish-American ace who became the top Yuzov fighter pilot in Europe, racking up 28 kills, most of them in the jug. Think of Thunderbolt strafing the beaches of Normandy, ripping German bunkers apart so infantry could push forward. Think of the Battle of the Bulge, when low-flying jugs pounded German armor even in the freezing snow, their wings white with frost, their guns blazing. The jug was not elegant. It was not loved like the Mustang. But it was feared. And sometimes, in war, fear is the sharpest weapon of all. And then came the endgame. By 1944 and 1945, the Luftwaffe was broken, its pilots outnumbered, its fuel gone. But still, they tried. And still, the jug hunted them, killed them, crushed their hopes. By war's end, the Thunderbolt had destroyed over 7,000 enemy aircraft in the air, tens of thousands of vehicles and trains on the ground. It had fought across Europe, across the Pacific, in every theater where the Allies needed a hammer. It had been mocked as the milk bottle. But it ended as the monster. The Jug. The indestructible beast of the skies. And its thunder still echoes today. June 6, 1944. The beaches of Normandy were hell itself. Smoke, fire, blood, steel, men clinging to the sand as machine guns shredded the air. The fate of the free world hung in the balance. And above that chaos, the Jug came. The P-47 Thunderbolt screamed over the shoreline, engines howling, wings bristling with death. Pilots swooped low, almost skimming the waves, their cockpits rattling from the roar of their own guns. They weren't just escorting bombers anymore. They were the hammer, smashing German fortifications, raking trenches, silencing bunkers that pinned down American, British, and Canadian soldiers below. Infantrymen later said they never forgot the sight, the giant silhouette roaring in low, its guns flashing, its bombs thundering. The ground shook. The air split open. For men pinned under fire, that sound was salvation. One soldier wrote in his diary, "When the Jugs came, we lifted our heads from the sand. We could breathe again. The sea was red, but the sky belonged to us." Day after day, the Jug struck deeper into France. It became the terror of German armor. Panzers that once rolled across Europe like unstoppable giants now cowered under the Jug's wrath. 8 Brownings chewed through lighter vehicles, while rockets and bombs ripped open tanks like tin cans. German tankers began to dread the clear blue sky. Even a hint of distant thunder could mean a squadron of Jugs was coming for them. Survivors described how entire columns of armor would scatter, crews abandoning machines worth millions of marks, because the Jug was overhead. One German officer bitterly admitted, "We were not defeated by tanks or infantry. We were defeated by those damn Jabos." The Jug's role wasn't glamorous. It wasn't dueling aces in the high clouds like the Spitfire. It wasn't soaring elegantly like the Mustang. No, the Jug was in the mud, the smoke, the blood. It was the fist pounding the enemy into dust so the infantry could advance. And yet, that made it unforgettable. Because every man on the ground knew, when the Jug came, death followed. But whose death depended on the uniform you wore? In the summer of 1944, as the Allies pushed across France, the Jug was everywhere. Strafing rail lines so no German train could move. Blasting convoys on roads until they were nothing but burning wrecks. Shredding retreating columns in the infamous Falaise Pocket, where German forces were trapped and slaughtered from above. Pilots called it the turkey shoot. Germans called it annihilation. The Luftwaffe tried to resist. But by then, they were broken. Their fuel was gone, their pilots young and inexperienced, their machines outnumbered. Against the Jug, they stood little chance. And still, the Jug did not stop. December 1944. The Ardennes. The last gamble of the Third Reich. The Battle of the Bulge. Snow lay thick over the forests. German armor punched through American lines, catching the Allies off guard. It was a desperate moment. Roads clogged with tanks. Troops scattered. Villages burned. And then, the weather cleared. The Jugs came. They roared low through the frozen valleys, snow blasting up in their wake. They strafed convoys, smashed bridges, turned tanks into smoking hulks. Even in the bitter cold, even when their wings froze with ice, the Jug's engine never failed. Mechanics chipped frost off with their bare hands. Pilots flew until their fingers went numb. And still they came, again and again, hammering the German spearhead until it shattered. One American officer later said, "The Thunderbolts broke the bulge as much as Patton did." By 1945, Germany was collapsing. The Luftwaffe was a shadow of itself. But the Jug was stronger than ever. It tore through the heart of the Reich, smashing everything that moved. Trains. Gone. Factories. Rubble. Convoys. Flames. Airfields. Craters. German civilians looked up at the sound of that engine and knew terror. Soldiers whispered prayers when they heard the whistle of a Jug's dive. And the Reich, once proud and defiant, was ground down under its relentless assault. The P-47 had become more than a fighter. It was an executioner. And by the time the guns fell silent in May 1945, the Jug's legacy was written in blood and fire. It had destroyed over 7,000 enemy aircraft. Tens of thousands of vehicles. Trains beyond counting. It had escorted bombers over Berlin, saved infantry at Normandy, crushed tanks in the Ardennes. It had been mocked as the milk bottle. It ended as thunder. But the story did not end with victory. Because for those who flew it, those who faced it, the Jug never truly went silent. The war ended. Guns fell silent. The smoke of battle drifted away. But for the men who had lived inside the cockpit of the P-47 Thunderbolt, silence was never complete. Even decades later, they swore they could still hear it, the growl of the double Wasp engine, deep and bone-shaking, like thunder rolling across a summer storm. The metallic roar of 8 Brownings opening fire. The rattling scream of wind as the Jug plunged into a dive so steep it felt like the world was collapsing around you. These weren't just sounds. They were memories etched into the souls of the men who survived them. At reunions, old pilots gathered in tents and halls, their hair white, their hands unsteady, but their voices alive as they retold the tales of the Jug. They laughed, they shook their heads, sometimes they wiped away tears. One veteran was asked what he owed to the P-47. He didn't pause. My wife. My children. My grandchildren. Every smile at my table today, that's the Jug. She carried me home when nothing else could. Another said quietly. It wasn't graceful. But it was faithful. And faithful wins wars. For them, the Jug was not just a machine. It was a companion. A savior. A beast that had thrown itself between them and death again and again. But across the ruins of Europe, the Jug's shadow lived on in another way. German veterans remembered it not as a savior, but as a terror. For them, the P-47 was a monster that ruled the skies. Some called it the bulldozer of the air. Others, the executioner. For farmers who had seen their trains erupt in fire, for soldiers strafed along lonely roads, for Luftwaffe pilots who had emptied their guns into its iron hide only to watch it keep flying, the Jug became a nightmare. Even children of the 1940s remembered it. They remembered diving into ditches as Jugs screamed overhead, the earth exploding, fire raining from the sky. For them, the Jug wasn't an airplane. It was death given wings. Adolf Galland, one of Germany's most famous aces, admitted years later. We had jets. We had rockets. We had desperate men. But against the Thunderbolt, nothing endured. It crushed us not with elegance, but with sheer, brutal inevitability. That inevitability was the Jug's true power. Because the P-47 wasn't elegant. It wasn't the fastest. It wasn't the most famous. But it was relentless. It refused to die. And in that way, it reflected the men who flew it. They weren't polished aristocrats like the British Spitfire pilots. They weren't the legendary knights of the Luftwaffe. They were farm boys. Factory workers. Sons of immigrants. Men thrown into the inferno of Europe with little more than training, grit, and luck. They weren't elegant. But they were tough. They were relentless. And like the Jug, they refused to die. After the war, many Thunderbolts were scrapped. Melted down, cut into pieces, their hulking frames sold for pennies. The Mustang stole the headlines. The jet age dawned, sleek and modern. But the Jug didn't vanish. Not really. Because legends don't need headlines. They live in memory. In stories whispered in bars. In diaries tucked away in drawers. In the way a veteran's eyes lit up when he heard that engine again, even 50 years later. At airshows, when the rare P-47 roars to life, you feel it. The ground shakes. The air trembles. The sound isn't just noise, it's history speaking. Children clap their hands over their ears. Veterans smile through tears. And for a moment, decades collapse, and the jug is back. That is the legacy of the Republic P-47 Thunderbolt. It was mocked as a flying milk bottle. It was underestimated as slow, clumsy, ugly. But it became one of the deadliest, most indestructible war machines ever built. It was a monster to its enemies, a guardian to its friends, and a legend to all who knew it. The jug. Ugly. Loud. Merciless. Unstoppable. And utterly unforgettable. Because legends aren't always born in beauty. Sometimes, they are forged in fire, in steel, in thunder. And the jug was thunder itself. The war had ended, but the jug's echo rolled on. In quiet homes across America, veterans would sometimes stop mid-sentence at the faint sound of an airplane overhead. For a moment, their eyes would glaze, their breath catch. They weren't in their living room anymore. They were back over France, over the Ardennes, over Normandy, with smoke in the cockpit and tracer fire whipping past their canopy. Always, it was the jug that came back to them. Some remembered the deep vibration of the engine, rattling through their bones like a heartbeat that wasn't their own. Others remembered the weight of the control stick in their gloves, stiff and stubborn, as if the machine itself demanded strength from the man flying it. And many remembered the silence after a battle, the kind of silence only the jug could give, because somehow, against all odds, it had brought them home alive. To the men who flew it, the P-47 was more than steel and rivets. It was loyalty made into a machine. One pilot, interviewed near the end of his life, put it simply. You don't forget the beast that carried you through hell. Another, voice trembling with age, said. When I hear that engine today, I don't hear an airplane. I hear my friends. I see their faces. The jug didn't just save me, it saved the memory of them, too. But for those who faced it, the jug was remembered with dread. German infantry described the fear that gripped them when they heard the whistle of its dive. They spoke of frozen terror as its guns shredded columns, as rockets tore open armor, as bombs erased entire crossroads. One survivor recalled hiding under a wagon as a jug screamed overhead, its guns tearing the earth apart around him. He pressed his face into the dirt, ears ringing, lungs choking on dust, certain he would die. When he crawled out minutes later, everything around him burned. Trucks, comrades, even the horses that had pulled the wagons. All gone. Only he remained, shaking, alive by accident. For him, the jug was not just an airplane. It was a demon. And yet, beyond the terror and the survival, the jug carried something even larger, a lesson. Because war is often remembered in terms of beauty, the sleek Spitfire, the elegant Mustang, the futuristic jet. But the jug was not beautiful. It was not sleek. It was not elegant. It was heavy. It was loud. It was awkward. And it was unstoppable. That was its secret. That was its gift. That was why it became a legend. The Republic P-47 Thunderbolt destroyed more than 7,000 enemy aircraft. It crippled the German army's supply lines, erased its convoys, shattered its morale. It became the hammer that pounded the Reich into the ground, one train, one road, one tank at a time. But its greatest achievement was not in what it destroyed. It was in what it protected. Tens of thousands of bomber crews returned home because of the jug. Tens of thousands of infantrymen advanced under its cover. Tens of thousands of pilots lived to tell their stories because the jug simply refused to quit, no matter how broken, battered, or burned. The Jug did not win the war alone. But without it, victory might have cost far more lives, taken far more years, demanded far more blood. And so, when you hear its name today, the Thunderbolt, the Jug, understand what it really means. It means salvation, for the men it carried home. It means terror, for the enemies it crushed without mercy. It means loyalty, endurance, and brute strength when nothing else would do. The Jug was mocked as the flying milk bottle. But it ended as thunder. Not just thunder in the sky, but thunder in history, thunder in memory, thunder that still rolls across the decades every time its engine roars to life. At airshows today, when one of the few surviving P-47s lifts into the sky, the world seems to pause. The ground trembles. The sky vibrates. Veterans close their eyes and smile through tears. Children cover their ears, startled by the raw force of that sound. It is more than an airplane flying. It is memory. It is history. It is thunder reborn. And as it passes overhead, you can almost feel the ghosts of 1943 and 1944, the boys who climbed into those cockpits, scared but unbroken, trusting their lives to a machine that looked like a joke but fought like a god of war. The Jug still flies for them. So remember it well. The Republic P-47 Thunderbolt. The Jug. Ugly. Heavy. Loud. Indestructible. The beast that saved thousands. The monster that terrified millions. The hammer of the skies. The thunder that never fades. Because legends are not always pretty. Legends are not always sleek. Sometimes, legends are forged in fire, in steel, in thunder. And the Jug was thunder itself.